One hot summer day, after mucking stalls and bedding down 150 head of dairy cows, I searched for my then boyfriend to chill for a minute before I'd have to start milking the cows. He wasn't in the barns, though his truck was there, so I thought it was weird. The next place I looked was the shop where they would fix and maintain the tractors. It's basically a garage with a dirt floor, wood stove, toolboxes and a couple tractors being worked on. As I peeked into the doorway, I saw a dark shadow of a man with longer facial hair and a super bent baseball cap bent over the engine of one of the tractors. Thinking it's my boyfriend, I said his name in the form of a question as I realized the figure is not only shorter than my boyfriend but the shop was pitch black. At that moment the figure looked up and over at me. Terrified, I ran as fast as I could to the farm's owner's house so I wouldn't be alone until milking time. Not 5 minutes later my boyfriend rolls in on a tractor because he had been raking a field across the street. Obviously he wasn't driving the one that had been in the shop because only non-runners would have been parked in there. I go on to tell my boss's girlfriend about what had happened, and she tells me that my boyfriend looks exactly like his grandfather except taller, who had passed 12 before I had started working there, which is also before we had started dating. Anytime I'd have the urge to go chill with the cows in the barn between milkings, it would always be close to pitch black aside from the dimmest light coming from the self-closing milkroom doorway. You would have to hold the door open to try and see where the right light switches were for either part of the barn that you wanted to go in, and of course in order to reach the switch for the darkest and creepiest side was too far away to hold the door open for its light, and you would have to stick your head into the pitch black to reach the switch. Just before I switched the light on, a shadow darted away from me and between the stanchions and out of sight. I figured someone was in there that shouldn't have been, so I slowly walked in that direction and said the dumbest horror movie line ever. "Hello?" The only place anyone could have gone to hide was the old hayloft, so I followed. Sweating at this point due to the awkward silence of the sleeping cows. None of them were chewing cud or snoring, but still in listening with their ears flicking from one direction to the other. As I climbed the very old, skinny stairs leading up into the light, I saw nobody. The owner's father in his 70s walked by the giant open door at ground level and asked me what I was doing up there and that part of the barn wasn't safe for kids to be exploring. A bit startled, I told him I thought I saw someone come up the stairs this way and I wanted to be sure it wasn't a stranger. He peeked behind me where they stacked hay and had no lights, and I followed his gaze to a shadow going behind the stacks where there was clearly no room for a person. We exchanged the same look, and with a bit of fear in his voice he told me not to be exploring on my own because nobody would know where to find me if I got hurt. Then he half jogged back to the house and I went back to the milk room to wait for chore time. While sitting at the break table with my head down, I could still see the automatic door to the barn open a few inches and slam shut. Now I know it's not a windy day and there are no small animals that would push the door open, only that much, so I sat up and looked around the milk tank thinking there must be a rat or something, but there was no sound of nails on concrete, which was strange. As soon as my head touches my arm to get comfortable, the door does it again, but twice and faster and harder than the last time. I take this as a sign I'm not allowed to rest, so I go up to the house and set an alarm for chores while I close my eyes in the recliner. I hadn't wanted to be in my boss's grandmother's house because it felt intrusive where I wasn't related and just worked there. Just before the alarm is set to go off, my eyes shot open in time to see another big dark shadow out of the corner of my eye go back around the corner into what looks like another living room, but the family knows it as the salt and pepper shaker room because of all the shelves full of antique salt and pepper shakers. I hop up out of the chair, shut my alarm off and go straight down to the milk room and start turning on all the lights so I can breathe for a minute before I grab the scraper and head into the barn. One beautiful fall day I was hanging out with the cows in the milk barn and I noticed that one of my absolute favorite cows was in labor, so I decided to stay close by to keep an eye on her. She is one of the bigger Dutch Beelps they had. Mind you, all of the milk cows are chained to the stanchions to keep them from finding their way into the manger or knocking the 60-pound barn doors off of their track. They are let out into the pasture after the morning milking during the months that there is grass to graze on, with the only exception being any cow showing signs of labor or being close to calving. All of the cows are in their default position of laying down, and since there were more cows than the stanchion should hold, it was a bit crowded with just enough room for the cows to at least lay down. Next to her is a fresh Holstein heifer who wasn't so used to people being close to her, so she stood up immediately when I walked by to be sure all of the bedding was clean for the coming calf. On the other side of the Dutch belt was an old brown Swiss taking up too much room by laying sort of diagonal with her back against the laboring cows behind. I knew this would be an issue but decided to leave them alone in hopes the cows would change position on their own once the labor progressed enough for it to become a more serious problem. About an hour and a half later I checked back in on them, and the unborn calf's feet are against the brown cow's back. I knew that was probably going to end in a stillbirth, so I walked up between the fresh cow and Dutch belt to try and unhook the laboring mom, but as soon as I reached for the bull hitch, the Dutch belt stood up, and with the full force of a mad mama, she had butted me without backing up and pinned me against the ribcage of the cow behind me. In total panic of either bruising my heart or getting a collapsed lung, I tried to take as many shallow breaths as I could and tried to move the cow's head to the side to try and get out of reach, but with no luck. I resorted to punching the cow on the end of the nose as hard as needed until she backed up enough for me to hop the manure-filled gutter to safety. So much for me trying to help, right? Having a hard time taking in a full breath and being about an hour before I had to start milking the cows, I sat down in one of the piles of sawdust to try and get myself together. Tears leaked with every thump of my heartbeat, as it was also painful. Since my boss was away trying to score some good deals at a farm auction, his brother was the only one helping me get the night milking done, and after setting up the first 5 milkers on the cows, I knelt down in the aisle on some sawdust in pain. It was so bad that I thought for sure there were either cracked ribs or I was having many heart attacks. My boss's brother brushed off the situation and told me to rest up in the milk room until my ride was scheduled to show up, as I was only about 15. In fear of my mom making me quit or giving my boss a hard time about any injury I may have acquired, I kept my mouth shut and didn't tell my mom how bad my chest hurt. When I finally told her what happened, she laughed and said that I should have just left the cows alone and that it probably wasn't that bad. A few days later the most dreaded day came when I had to participate in gym class or go to the nurse for a solid excuse to still get graded instead of a big, fat 0. I refused and got the 0 because I wasn't sure if the school nurse would do more than look at my purple bruised chest, call home and tell me to take some over-the-counter pain medication that I was already maxed out on. My teachers were less than sympathetic, to say the least, and even gave me a hard time about accepting the 0 that day. After that whole ordeal, I lost my passion for working with animals and never hung out in the barns after that, even though I still did my job and did it to the best of my ability.